Okay. All right. So joining us now, take a little bit of a turn to again. This is something that I think Michael would have made fun of me for, because I am also a little bit of a fix-it myself. Louis Rossmann, he's the owner and founder of the Rossmann Repair Group. He's got a YouTube channel, and it focuses on being able to fix your stuff, which the right to repair has become has sort of re-entered into the sort of the news in the wake of Joe Biden's executive order that he was going to ramp up antitrust things. Louis, welcome to the program. I'm here with Emma Vigeland.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Uh, the first thing I want to say is, do you accept interns? Because I want to apply. I, I, I did a little bit of this back in the day with VCRs, and I occasionally have rehabbed a lot of our computers in this in our office, and I think it's fantastic that you're sort of helping people to empower people to do this.
Well, we actually started offering workshops in the store, and I'm trying to do them about 2 or 3 times a week where people can come by for 2 to 3 hours, use the soldering equipment, the microscope, and the hot air station, and they can bring in anything they want to fix. So last week, we had someone show up with a broken Xbox, a CB radio, a Garmin GPS. Some of it we fixed, some of it we didn't, but I like having people come in on their own time to just be able to use the lab equipment if they don't have any at home. And yeah, we are actually, it's not an internship, but we are actually allowing people to just come in from time to time with stuff that doesn't work at a lot of times and be able to use the equipment here to do their own fix. And if they can't figure it out, then one of us will work with them and try to see if we can figure it out so that they can learn something.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, now let's talk about it in terms of, there's obviously environmental reasons why you do that. There's a whole host of reasons why you would do that. But let's talk about the ability to do that and how this sort of this idea of right to repair ends up becoming a real political economy question. What has happened to our ability, our right to repair these things?
I think over the past 30 years, there's been a really, really slow shift away from the open availability of schematics and documents and parts. And it's just been kind of this slow fade that we didn't really notice until it was too late. You know, as Steve Wozniak recently said, with the machines that he worked on in the 70s and 80s, they came with thick books and manuals that did the schematics and everything that you needed. And if there was a chip or something that broke in it, you could just find a vendor and be able to purchase it. And now you fast forward to 2021, if you buy one of the latest MacBook Pros and it stops charging because the Texas Instruments charging chip stopped working, I can't go to Texas Instruments and buy that chip. I can't go to Newark or Mouser or DigiKey and buy that because they have a restriction. They have an exclusivity agreement that bars me from being able to get that chip. So you're stuck now going to Apple paying $1,000 to $2,000 for that repair, and you're also not going to get any of your data off of the machine, even if you do pay them for the repair because they don't offer it. So it's one of these areas where the manufacturer is not interested in offering component level repair, but they're also putting in active measures to ensure that other people can't do it. And that's where I've tried to raise the alarm on this and showcase on my channel. These are repairs that we're competent to do, we're able to do, that we're able to save people money. Here is the specific way in which the manufacturer is going out of their way to ensure that that can't happen. And in my opinion, it's wrong.
I mean, they're not just going out of their way. I mean, this is part of their business strategy, right? I mean, they are creating. I don't know if this would be defined as a. I guess it's a they're monopolizing. They're creating a monopsony on one end, and they're monopolizing the market for this, and it is one of those situations where it's not only costing consumers more, but it's also inhibiting people's ability to have shops that might repair this stuff. I mean, it has inhibitions throughout our entire economy.
Yeah, and I would like to try and propose the argument that what's happening here is actually a tie. They're tying the purchase of a repair service to the purchase of that product from that company. If you are going to make the device difficult to repair, fine. That's not something that I have an issue with. But when they go out of their way to ensure that even basic components that used to just a few years ago be openly available, not be available for fixing basic problems, at that point you are kind of tying the repair of the device to purchasing all of your services from that one company. similar to what Kodak was doing in the late 80s and early 90s. And I hope to see the FTC start enforcing antitrust a little bit more here, which seems to be something that they've kind of fallen off the bandwagon with about over the last 5 to 10 years.
How much? I mean, has this been over the past 5 or 10 years, or is this? I mean, I mean, I'm coming at this from having talked to a lot of people about antitrust over the years, and I think there was a lot of people who were surprised that, who don't pay attention to this stuff, who are surprised that Biden even made that an issue in his executive order. I mean, how much of how much is your sense that there's a political movement out there that's associated with this, or has this been just something that you've come across because this is what you're doing as an individual?
I came across this because this is what I do as an individual. But it wasn't until I started doing these YouTube videos and I started visiting legislatures that I started to realize that it's everywhere. When I went to Nebraska to lobby in behalf of this, I was in a room with a bunch of farmers, and I thought, why are a bunch of farmers in here for a right to repair bill? I had no idea that this was an issue that affected them. When I went to New York, upstate to New York 3 years
Wait a
ago to
second.
go to
Tell us, explain to us I mean, how that does, because I don't think most people have that awareness either. Like, how does it affect farmers?
if they want to repair their tractor, very often for certain issues, they're stuck going to the dealer. And if you have to go to a dealer during, let's say it's a crop season, again, I'm not a farmer, so this isn't my thing. So I may misstep here in some of my explanation. But from what I hear from them, if they need a repair done, they need to be able to do it within the next 1 or 2 or 3 hours. They can't go to a dealer where they have to arrange a tow because the nearest dealer is 30 or 40 miles away. So not only are they stuck paying for a tow and they need to repair, but they're also stuck dealing with the dealership. A lot of the limitations I talk about when I talk about not being able to repair Apple products, there's a lot of similarity there to what a lot of tractor companies, particularly John Deere, do. And a lot of the people that showed up there had identical complaints to me. It's just you cross out the word MacBook and you put in the word tractor. But
I mean,
this is some.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. This is something where there were people in the medical industry fixing endoscopes that were showing up lobbying with me. There were people that wanted to be able to fix operating tables that were there saying, I can't get access to a $500 motor to a $30,000 operating table, and this is costing the hospital, over $30,000. This is something that's showing up in home appliances. So I didn't really know that this was something that was endemic to every corner of society. But it's something that I've been learning over the past few years, and I think more people are waking up to it and realizing they have the same problem as people in sister industries.
What other industries are there? I mean, with accepting that you have limitations, you may not, know exactly the issue that a farmer is going to face in that situation. But what other, when you're going around, like you see to other places, like where else have you traveled to advocate for this, and what other industries have you come across that this dynamic exists?
I've done this in Maine, Massachusetts, New York, Nebraska, Tennessee, and Washington and Maryland. And I've seen people show up that do appliance repair, medical device repair, tractor repair, and and consumer electronics repair, camera repair, car repair. So when I first started out at this, I just thought it's difficult to repair Apple products because the company makes it difficult. And what I found over the past few years is that this is something it's kind of a cultural shift that we've made to where people have not really noticed it. People have not really noticed that most items that they buy are less repairable. And it's not just because they're getting smaller or more technical or more complex. It's because there are active restrictions that the manufacturers are placing on people being able to fix their own stuff.
And again, to be clear with people, this is a form of monopoly, and I mean, the downstream impact of this, I think, is clear. As a business owner who's running a business, trying to do a business, it's a problem for the individual consumer. It's a problem for for startups. It's a problem. It also just makes people less, it requires them to pay more money, to get these things fixed, and all sorts of productivity. In the case of the farmers, you only get a certain amount of time where the crop is ready to be harvested, or you can get your seeds in the ground, or, you don't want your hay ruined because it's raining, whatever it is. There's a clock on this. So, give me a sense of, like, prior to Biden issuing this executive order, which we need to see the impact of it. But had there been any other organizations that you would come across when you were going to testify in these hearings? Were there broad movements that supported you? How did you end up getting there? Did you just someone write you and say, "Hey, we're doing this here. You might want to come," or what?
My friend Jessa Jones is friends with Gay Gordon Byrne from Repair.org, and she said you should come up and lobby with us. It'll be fun, and but you're going to have to wear a tie. And we had an argument about wearing a tie for about a half hour, but I finally conceded, and we went up, and it was actually a lot of fun. And what got me hooked on it was when I went up to the New York State Legislature, there was this one gentleman there who said, when you repair a motherboard and you run a wire on it, or you replace this fuse or this chip, you're converting the MacBook into a PC and then misrepresenting it as a MacBook to your customers, and that's fraud. And this legislator that I talked to was at least 70 years old. He wasn't the most technically savvy. And I said, with all due respect, did you actually believe that? And he said, well, now I don't. And I said, why did you believe that? And he said, nobody showed up to tell me otherwise. Well, now, now that you did, you got a signature, you got a co-sponsor for your bill. And he signed it. And I thought, this is amazing. So I like the fact that the only way that this has gotten this bad is because nobody else shows up. Everybody is so cynical and so jaded with the political system that this is the level of difficulty they're playing on. Like, that's easy difficulty. They show up, they make something up that is insane. I think my face was turning red when I heard this with anger, and I tried to contain it just because it was so ridiculous. And since nobody is showing up, they're able to get away with that kind of stuff. And I thought, okay, I'll be the person in the room. Like, if nobody else is showing up, I'm not a political advocate. I'm not a social person. I don't know how any of this works, but somebody's got to show up, so I'll show up. And then I started showing up all around the country every time one of these bills happened. And the first time I showed up at one of them, the testimony that I heard was just kind of really disingenuous and ridiculous. And I thought people should really hear what these lobbyists are saying so that we can have some change. So I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere, getting a bill passed that day. But I thought, let me just show up with my camera to show people what they're saying, that microwaves are going to explode, that phones are going to explode, that all this fear mongering. And that stuff really started to go viral online. People don't like listening to lobbyists lie to politicians to diminish their rights as a consumer.
So wait a second. So that 70-year-old lawmaker in New York State, he had been told this by lobbyists that you were essentially converting the Mac into a PC by soldering a certain part of the motherboard, and therefore you were misrepresenting. That's actually funny if it if it wasn't have such real world implications. Um, and so this is basically what's so. And when you say one of these bills, you're talking about a right to repair bill.
Yeah, it's popped up in over 17 states across the country, and there are certain modifications for each individual state, but for the most part, all of them are based on the same template, which is almost a copy and paste of the Massachusetts Automotive Right to Repair Bill that passed in 2012.
I see. And is there a when with these with the right to repair.org folks, the who are sort of ostensibly like sort of lobbying for the right to repair, is there any sort of like broad strategy of, if we allow for this right, let's say in New York State, which is a huge market, or maybe California, which is a huge market. I mean, we see this dynamic in the context of things like cafe standards in California. If California puts on some type of standards, it ends up becoming nationwide because it's just more expensive to create cars for California separately than the rest of the country. Is there a dynamic like that there, or is it possible that you get a law passed? I mean, has a law passed in any of these states?
No, it gets shot down every time.
Okay, well, I guess that explains that. But were it to pass, let's say you already passed one in New York State, would we have a system where theoretically you can repair this if you're in New York, and Texas Instruments can sell you this if you're in New York? Or how do you get Texas Instruments, let's just say, and I'm just using Texas Instruments as an example. You brought them up. I don't know this dynamic, but Texas Instruments doesn't sell a certain transistor that you need for some electronic device. It can't because of their deal with Apple. Let's just say, again, I'm making this up. How do you get them to sell it to you even if they're not restricted by Apple?
Well, the way that this would work in this type of globalized world, you cannot be able to sell a chip to someone in New York without that chip making its way everywhere else. So I wouldn't ask Texas Instruments or even Apple to sell me a chip directly. I would simply ask that these things be made available. And typically, Texas Instruments would sell to a distributor that then sells to a site like Mouser or DigiKey or Newark that then would sell to a retail schlub like me that only wants to buy 100 or 1,000 or 5,000 at a time. So if you make it so that that is available in New York, it's even if you only made it available in New York or only made it available in Massachusetts or Nebraska or Tennessee, somebody in that state is going to put up a website that says here are
Right.
chips that we have for sale, and they're going to be made available worldwide. Or if a schematic is made available in New York or Tennessee, that's going to get put somewhere and that's going to get shared. There's no way that you can have this passed in one region of the world but not in other regions of the world. So at that point, they would have to decide we're not going to sell to this state. Apple would have to decide that they are not going to want to sell MacBooks to two states with the most hipsters in the United States, or they're going to have to just stop being assholes. And what I would imagine would happen is they would stop being assholes. And that's what happened with the automotive right to repair bill in 2012. They're not even asking for the car to be designed differently in other states. They're just asking you to make this stuff available. And they just decided to make it available for every state and mechanics in every state rather than just Massachusetts.
Okay, so in the fallout for the 2012 Massachusetts bill, it ended up opening up all these markets.
Yeah, and the reason that this bill that we have is very much so based on the Massachusetts Automotive Right to Repair Bill is that you look at it 9 years later and there haven't been negative unintended consequences from it. So it's not like we're using a piece of radical untested legislation. Cars are not blowing up that didn't blow up before. Mechanics are not, stealing information from their customers and then showing up in their garages to beat them like the commercials were showing last year.
I just want to make sure that that's a cat that's attacking you, and not like the
Oh,
specter of corporations who don't want
yes.
this legislation to build.
Yeah. Yes, this is
Pat.
Mr. Clinton. I had him on a T-shirt that said "Schematics or Die" or "Fight for Right to Repair" 5 years ago. He's a strong supporter.
So, give us a sense of like what's happening with this fight. Like, I mean, what was the response? I mean, it's interesting because we talk to people who are very political in nature, and this is you're coming at this from a different angle. It's literally this is you need to do this to you stumbled on the political dynamic as a function of trying to fix your computers essentially. What was the response within the community to Biden's announcement?
A lot of it was healthy skepticism because over the past 5 to 6 years, we've heard over and over again, we support what you're doing. Oh, I'll co-sponsor this bill, and something always winds up getting killed. So I'll be honest, just been a lot of healthy skepticism towards it. And for me, what I get out of this is that when I show up at a legislature, I don't have to hear, has the Attorney General said anything about this? Has the FTC said anything about this? I no longer have to just twiddle my thumbs and say, now I can say the FTC released a 59-page report encouraging state legislatures to do something. In their report, they said that every excuse you've heard today from a lobbyist has no basis in evidence or fact, and Biden asked the FTC to look into creating rules. So now, the thing I've noticed about lots of legislators is that what pushes them to pass legislation is either, or not pass it, is A, that it will make their base happy, or B, a fear that they are going to have a rug pull moment when they pass a piece of legislation that is massively unpopular or unsupported. And a lot of the legislators I've spoke to, they hear my concerns and they want to help, but they say, has anybody else spoken on this issue? Because they don't want to be the one that's, sticking their neck out only to have it chopped off by getting in trouble with the federal government by passing something at the state level that they cannot enforce. And when Biden says, we're encouraging you to issue rules against anti-competitive restrictions on using independent repair shops, that really does put some wind under the wings of state legislators, and it may make them be a little bit less risk averse, which is going to be great when going up to lobby this session.
I imagine there hasn't been an opportunity where you could test out that theory because it is fascinating to see the implications of the president just up there and do something that doesn't have an immediate effect, but empowers people who are activists like yourself to push, to lever, basically gives you more leverage when you're going to do this. Have you been out there lobbying since that has occurred?
A lot of the states where these bills have been introduced have sessions that are going to be starting again in September or October. But I did get a call from the personal cell phone of a legislator no, I don't want to say the state because I don't want to get it. I don't want the opposition to get started just yet. But he called and he bragged and he said, you know, I passed more bills than anybody in the state, and I want to make this my project. Tell me how I can solve issue X, Y, and Z. And that was awesome. I had a 2 hour conversation with him. I have his personal cell phone number, and this really does seem to have gotten people to notice it. That this is something that again, if they stick their neck out, they're not going to get in trouble for it, and that a lot of people in there that are their voters would support. I am still going to be doing this across legislatures around the country. I'm not waiting for the FTC to do something, because if you look at this executive order, it covers non-competes, drug prices, internet bills, airline refunds, switching banks and taking your data, and meat processing. They have a lot of work to do. I'm not, right to repair is in the list, and that's great, but there's a good chance of them not getting to it just with everything else they have on the list. So I am going to use this as leverage to try to get all of these state legislatures that have gone to it before that have said, I'm not really sure if we're going to get in trouble if we do this, and say, no, you're not. The FTC and the president both support you.
And to be clear, this legislation that you're pushing, the the legislation you're pushing would have, like, is it it happened for cars in Massachusetts, but would yours be more universal, so that, let's say you pass a legislation in New York, it would help farmers. Well, there's a lot of farmers in New York, but farmers in Nebraska as well, with that same dynamic. In other words, would it be tractors? Would it be computers? Would it be cars? Would it be how is that legislation framed? Like, how broadly does it cover general products that need to be repaired?
It depends on the state. And there was some pushback in New York because this bill did not specifically exclude agriculture. So that got us some pushback because they think that this is too broad. So in other states, what they've done is they've tried to limit the bill to a specific field. This one's only consumer electronics. This one's only medical. This one's only agriculture. And in different states, we're trying different approaches to kind of see which one works and if any of them get pushed forward. And something that was kind of sad over the past year is that in both Nebraska and Montana, very farming heavy states, that they had agriculture only bills, so where they cut out the iPhone people and the medical people and the computer and the appliance people, and they said, we're just working on agriculture, and they were unable to get even that passed. And I'm really hoping that this changes it, because all of that not being able to get anywhere happened right before this report and executive order came out.
What have you guys? I'm just curious about this, just because you have a firm grasp on the strategy. What about going to a place where there's no agriculture lobby, where there's very little agriculture, and getting the farm bill, a farm equipment passed there, because there's less opposition, and then that place becomes, I don't know what state that would be that has the least amount of agriculture, but that state ends up being the hub for buying tractor schematics and supplying with tractor parts.
I have never thought of that, but it's something to consider. I got to ask A about that.
Oh, all right. Well, good. That would be great if that worked
I haven't
out.
spent as much time on the agriculture side just because, like, I know little to nothing about it. I know a lot about my specific section of consumer electronics. With agriculture, like I've been to a farm once in my life.
I mean, it's just it's amazing, because I think, like, in those places where the need to right to repair is the most, one would imagine there's also the strongest lobby against it. But if there is a dynamic where certain states, where once this information is available and the products are sold in one state, then you basically have let the cat out of the bag. I don't know. Maybe you go where there's as little need as possible. It becomes a very uncontroversial bill, but ends up making that state the hub of repairing for other states. I don't know if
Yeah.
that works that way, but it's fascinating stuff. I'm curious. Has it expanded? Has it changed your politics, your perspective on politics at all more broadly? I mean, and I have no idea what your politics were before this, but has it? Are you seeing? Are you more conscious of monopolistic practices in other places, in other
I
sectors of our economy?
I think it changed my politics in two ways. It didn't change. First thing I noticed is that left versus right matters a lot less than I thought it did, because I have been laughed, and I have it on film, laughed out of legislatures by both people on the left and the right, And I've had people on both the left and the right co-sponsor bills and say, I'm going to go to bat for you. I don't care if I'm sticking my neck out. It really seems to be a difference between politicians that listen to their constituents and politicians that listen to lobbyists. And I've noticed that distinction much more clearly. That's what matters. Are you someone where, as if some, if a group of 10 people shows up to your office and explains something to you, you'll take the time to listen? Or are you only going to listen if they're showing up from CTA, Apple, or Google? That is a very clear distinction that I've noticed from the time that I've spent doing this. And in my YouTube comment section, I will see all the time the constant fighting between the two sides saying, of course, this is the side that's going to support it. No, that's the side that's going to support it. And in reality, I'll always have to remind them, that's not what it's about. You need to vote for someone that actually listens to you, that is open to like letting you in your office and letting you change their mind. And what I learned from it as well as that is that normal people, they actually have a bit more power than they think they do. They just don't use it because they're so cynical. And I don't blame people for being cynical, looking at the political landscape and how little things have changed in the direction people wanted to over the past 10 or 20 years. But when I could show up in an office completely unprepared, no script, never been to a legislature before, and get a legislator to just co-sponsor something that he was against it just before, that really changed it for me. It made me realize that normal people have a lot more say than they think they do if they actually start showing up. And it gave me a little bit of hope.
Well, that's great. How can people get involved in the right to repair, movement, I guess?
What I tell people is cultural should come before legislative. So what I try to do on my channel, I try to get people excited about being able to fix something that they own, being able to either save money, make money for themselves if they run a repair business, or just get that nice kick of dopamine when they actually see the fan spin or the screen come on. Because once you have someone who has that happy moment where the screen comes on after 2 hours of work, they'll be hooked and they'll support it. And for them to get other people in their lives involved. Legislatively, what they could do is you could go to a site like repair.org, see if there is a bill introduced in your state. If you put your address and your information in, it'll tell you who your legislators are. It'll tell you the bill numbers, and let them know that this is something that matters to you. Give them a call. Give them an email. Well, more of them are open to listening than most people think, and it does make a difference.
What is the breakdown that you've come across? If you had to say percentage, who are listening to corporate lobbyists versus the people who knock on their door, their constituents. Give me some percentages.
That's a tough one. That is a difficult one. I honestly wouldn't be able to say,
All
but
right.
I have to think about it and come up with that. So I would give something that's fair. But I will say that it does seem to be changing in the direction of less of them listening to the lobbyists. The thing here that's important is that the American system, when it comes to politics, is set up for gridlock. It's very cautious. I would rather that nothing get done rather than something get done and it be bad. So it really doesn't take a large number of people listening to a corporate lobbyist for this to not pass. It only takes one or two people that to clog up the works at a particular area for nothing to get done. And that's what makes it so hard for us to get anything done, because we need to get such widespread support in such a short time period from so many different people. And there are times where this person is becoming the ambassador to Ireland, or that person is moving on to a new position. We've had times this year and also 3 years ago in New York where we actually do have a champion for our bill, and then they get promoted to another position, and then they get replaced, and then you have to start from scratch convincing the new person of everything. So
Louis Rossmann, real pleasure to talk to you. Owner, founder, Rossmann Repair Group, and you can check out his YouTube page. We'll put a link to that in our podcast and YouTube description. Thank you so much for your time today, man. Really appreciate it.
thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
All right, folks, quick break. We'll be right back. Wrap things up.